This is a stone ground wholemeal which has been sifted to take out the very coarse particles of bran. Fine particles of bran and fine particles of germ are left in there. That's just why it's brown flour, and this is like a lighter bread and is kind of historically the most suitable bread. Parisians accept this as bread. So it's been sitting there for an hour hydrating, that is soaking up water. So already we have gluten strands automatically formed by themselves because I didn't need this, and I reiterate this theme all the time. The more you stand aside, sourdough bread makes itself. So it needs 10 grams of sea salt. So 10 grams of sea salt. Mix that through, because this first hydration or soaking is done completely without sea salt, any salt. So there it is. That's quite a sticky and a thick dough, and I'm going to add 250 grams of the leaven, which I've prepared here, which is fully beautifully mature and wonderful and ready to go. Look at this, gorgeous. Okay, so 250 grams. And of course that's going to make the dough a lot wetter. So I'm just going to add a little bit, handful of flour to try and make a more doughy texture, and I'll simply mix that in. I love this technique with a bowl, and it replicates industrial bread machinery actually. You can stand and simply spin this bowl as you work the bread, rather than doing any labour intensive, laborious, type stuff, which it can be difficult and hard. So just work it in with the slip, the baker's second hand, valuable equipment. Get one or cut one out of an old piece of plastic, however, buy one. Baker's slips are so important. So this is coming together as a pretty sticky dough, but we want this to be a bit soft because that will enable it to rise more easily and to have those nice holes in it that we want. And that's the bottom line of bread making, really. No hard doughs. Doughs have to be soft. Okay, this is coming together nicely. It's a bit sticky. I'm going to add a tiny little bit of flour. Remember, this is beyond recipes. That's enough. And now I'm going to get in there with my hands and do the minimum of kneading, because as you can see, this is kind of doing it itself in a way. Just spin the bowl as you're doing it. It requires a lot less effort. Pretty sticky dough here. But again, as I leave that to stand, or to prove as we call it, that will slightly firm up. The gluten which I'm forming, these strands which hold it all together, is absorbing the water as we go, and the motion of kneading forms the kind of geometric matrix of the bread, which will come out as a nice airbag. This is a fraction stickier than what I want, so we're beyond recipes here. I'm just going to put a little bit more flour in it to make it handleable. However, if you don't want to, this is a perfectly good sticky sourdough. Not everybody is capable of handling it, so I'm just making it a bit easier for you to show you that it will come together now as a firmer and a rounder integrated entity, which is what we want. But there's minimum kneading. I'm not putting pressure on this at all. Spinning the bowl, just rolling it really with my hands. See, you don't need any of the strenuous stuff that a lot of people have been led to believe we do need. So there's a nice integrated dough, and it's nice and soft and sticky. It's what we want. So it's going to go back in here for another 2 hours of rising. Right, well, this has been resting for 2 hours since I put the leaven in it, and it will be nicely advanced in fermentation, which we can see here. Yep. So I'm going to turn it out, and this first shaping, final shaping, is I'm going to round it, see? And establish some tension in this round, which is really important to sort of stimulate the gluten stress it out a bit. It elasticizes back into shape. So we'll just rest that for a minute. Keep it covered while I flour the basket for it. Don't skimp on flouring your baskets. When the dough sticks in there and you're turning it out into the oven and it rips open, well, not pretty. So that's had a bit of a rest. I'm just going to finally give it one shape, like this. Yep, that's nice. Roll it in flour, perhaps a bit more. Seam on the bottom like that, into the basket. And that's it. And now that's going to go and sit for another 2 hours until it completely fills the basket and is finally really aerated. But you don't have to stay here, go away, leave it. This loaf's ready to bake, and you can see it's developed some fissures and a little bubble breaking, more fissures, so it could actually rise more for another half an hour, which would produce a more difficult to handle loaf, but still it would work, and it would be a bit more advanced and perhaps a bit more holy, but this will do because it's nicely fissured and just ready to go and domed. What we need to do if we're going to make a crusty loaf of bread is to have a nice steamy environment in the oven, and that is simply achieved by putting a tray of water in the bottom of the oven. And that will produce lots of steam. The next thing we have to do is heat up the tray that we're going to put the loaf on. That's the first step. Here's the nicely risen loaf, as you can see. So what I'm going to do is turn that out upside down onto that hot tray, and then I'm going to slash it with a razor blade so it won't burst, it can open up nicely. Time to go in the oven. So I'm going to pull this hot tray out. We've got steam. Okay, halfway through the bake, because we want a nice crusty loaf, we have to take this tin away from underneath the loaf, so I'll do that. Like that. Okay, 35 minutes, this should be ready. You can leave it in for another 5 minutes if you want an extremely crusty loaf of bread. But this looks pretty good to me. Yep. Sounds pretty good. Yeah. Beautiful, and you can see how the cuts have opened up nicely, otherwise the loaf would have burst really unattractively, which is why we slashed the bread. That's a beautiful loaf, and that was so easy to make.